Hello and welcome to the Vailrun Tapes. Every story here is true. It happened to a real person, and they wrote it down or said it out loud, so the rest of us would know. Tonight, I'll share a few of them with you. A lot of you come back here every night, and that means a lot to me. These stories stay with people. That's just what they do. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I read all of them. And if you like these stories, a quick like and subscribe really help. Now get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin.
When I was around 9 or 10 years old, I had a friend come over to my house for the day. It should have been an ordinary visit. We planned to play upstairs, talk, laugh, and find ways to entertain ourselves while my mom handled things around the house. At that age, days like that usually blended together. A friend came over, we made a mess in my room, argued over toys or games, and eventually forgot most of it. This day did not fade. Even now, years later, certain parts of it remain so clear that thinking about them makes me uncomfortable. I can still picture the upstairs hallway, the open bedroom doors, my old bed, and the person I believed was my sister, walking around in the room across from mine. The strangest part is that my friend remembers seeing her too. At the time, I lived in a different bedroom from the one I use now. My old room was on the second floor, directly across the hallway from my older sister's bedroom. The layout made it easy to see into her room from mine. If I sat on my bed and looked through my open bedroom door, I could see straight across the short hallway and through her doorway. There was almost no angle between the rooms. I did not need to lean, stand, or look through a reflection. Her room was directly in front of me. If her door was open and she was walking around inside, I could see her clearly. My sister was 7 years older than me. At the time, she would have been about 17. Like many younger siblings, I had a complicated relationship with her. I looked up to her in some ways, but I was also easily annoyed by almost everything she did. She was older, had friends, used the phone often, and lived in a world that felt much more grown-up than mine. I was also, honestly, a brat when I was a child. I did not like being ignored. I complained quickly, and I had no problem telling someone to be quiet if I thought they were bothering me, even if they had every right to speak in their own room. That afternoon, my friend and I were playing on my bed. We were probably laughing, talking loudly, and doing nothing important. My mother was downstairs washing dishes. As far as I knew, she was the only other person in the house besides my friend and me. At least, that was what I thought before I looked across the hallway. I noticed my sister in her bedroom. She was pacing back and forth while speaking to someone on the phone. The sight did not seem strange at all. My sister often talked to her friends, and walking around while speaking was normal for her. She moved from one side of the bedroom to the other, holding the phone near her ear and continuing a conversation I could not fully understand. I remember exactly what she was wearing. She had on a pink t-shirt. She wore jeans. Her hair was pulled back into a ponytail. Those details have stayed with me more clearly than almost anything else from that day. I do not remember what my friend and I were playing or what the weather was like outside, but I remember the pink shirt, the jeans, and the ponytail. She looked completely solid. She did not appear transparent, pale, or ghostly. There was nothing about her face or body that made me question who I was seeing. It was my sister. I knew it as confidently as I would know my own mother standing in the kitchen. My friend could see her too. We did not stop playing in fear or ask why someone was in the other room. There was nothing frightening about the situation at first. My sister was simply home, pacing while talking on the phone. After a while, her voice began to annoy me. She seemed too loud, especially because my friend and I were trying to talk. Looking back, she probably was not making more noise than we were, but I was a child. and believed everyone else should adjust to what I wanted. I looked across the hall and told her to shut up. I expected an immediate response. My sister was 17. She would never have allowed her 9 or 10-year-old sibling to speak to her like that without saying something. She would have told me to mind my business, called me annoying, or answered with some quick sarcastic comment. Instead, she continued walking. Her tone did not change. Her head did not turn. She did not even look toward me. It was as though she had not heard anything. That irritated me more. I raised my voice and told her to shut up again. She kept pacing. Her phone remained at her ear. Her mouth continued moving as though she was still having the same conversation. She did not pause for even half a second. I remember thinking she was deliberately ignoring me. At that age, I did not see her lack of response as something frightening. I thought she was being rude. Maybe she believed refusing to acknowledge me would make me more angry. It worked. I called to her again. Nothing changed. My friend was still beside me, and I assumed she was watching too. She may have found the argument funny at first. Younger children often enjoy seeing siblings annoy one another. But my sister's complete lack of reaction became strange. I was not whispering. She was directly across the hall. Even if she had been focused on the phone conversation, she should have heard me. I tried the most powerful threat I could think of at that age. I'll tell Mom. That usually got some kind of response. My sister might not have been afraid of getting in trouble, but she would at least have rolled her eyes or told me to go away. She did nothing. She did not look toward the doorway. She kept moving in the same pattern, pacing across the room as though my friend and I did not exist. That was when I decided to go downstairs. I was genuinely angry by then. My friend came with me, and we left the bedroom. I do not remember whether I looked into my sister's room as we crossed the hallway. That detail feels important now, but the memory becomes less clear around that point. I do not know whether the figure was still pacing when we stepped into the hall. I do not remember walking past the doorway and seeing her at close range. Maybe we avoided looking inside because I was focused on reaching my mother. Or perhaps the memory was lost because of what happened next. We went downstairs and found my mom washing dishes. I complained that my sister was being mean. My mother barely reacted. She was busy and probably assumed I was reporting another normal sibling argument. Without stopping what she was doing, she said something like, "Natalia, stop." She thought I was creating trouble or trying to get my sister in trouble over something small. That made me more frustrated. I told her again that my sister was upstairs being mean and talking too loudly. This time, my mom stopped. She turned and looked down at me. Her expression changed because what I had said did not make sense. Then she told me, "Natalia, she isn't home. She's camping with a friend." For a moment, I did not understand. My sister could not be camping. I had just seen her. She had been pacing in her room wearing a pink shirt and jeans, talking on the phone. My friend saw her too. I had spoken to her several times. She was upstairs. I may have tried to argue with my mother. I may have told her she was wrong. But the memory becomes almost blank after she said those words. That is one of the most disturbing parts of the experience. I have little to no recollection of what happened during the rest of the day. I do not remember whether my mother went upstairs to check. I do not remember following her. I do not remember looking into my sister's room and finding it empty. I do not remember whether my friend and I continued playing, went home early, or spent the rest of the afternoon downstairs. There should be a normal sequence after a revelation like that. My mother should have asked me exactly what I saw. We should have run upstairs. I should remember the fear of approaching the bedroom. Instead, the day seems to stop at the kitchen. My mother says my sister is camping with a friend. Then everything after that is missing or blurred. My friend also has trouble remembering the rest of the day. That makes the memory gap harder to dismiss. If I alone had forgotten, I could blame shock, time, or ordinary childhood memory. People do not remember complete days from when they were 9, but both of us remember the sighting and the conversation with my mother, yet neither of us can clearly explain what happened afterward. My mother remembers the day too. She remembers us coming downstairs and insisting that my sister was in her bedroom. She remembers telling us my sister was away camping. That confirms the basic event happened. We did not invent the story years later. At the time, however, my family did not have an explanation. My sister was not home. She had left to camp with a friend and could not have been pacing in her room. There was no reason for another person to look exactly like her and walk around inside our house. No relative had come over wearing the same clothes. No one should have been upstairs besides my friend and me. The most ordinary explanation is that we were mistaken. Maybe clothes hanging in my sister's room created the shape of a person. A coat, dress, or shadow could have moved because of air from a vent or open window. From across the hall, my child's mind may have formed that movement into my sister pacing. But that does not explain the phone conversation. I heard a female voice. I saw the figure holding something near her ear. Her mouth seemed to move. She changed position repeatedly across the room. A shadow or hanging outfit would not create such a detailed scene. Another possibility is that my sister had not actually left yet. Perhaps my mother was confused about the timing. Maybe she was preparing to go camping later and was still upstairs when we saw her. But my mother was certain she was already gone. My sister later confirmed she had been away. If she had been home, she would remember me shouting across the hall and threatening to tell Mom. She does not. There is also the possibility that someone else entered the house. A teenage friend of my sister might have come in without my mother noticing. From a distance, a girl with a ponytail and similar clothes could have looked like my sister. Maybe she ignored me because she did not know I was speaking to her. But why would a stranger be pacing inside my sister's bedroom? How would she enter and leave without anyone noticing? My friend and I would have passed close to the room when going downstairs. My mother was on the first floor near the main living areas. No visitor was ever found. And I did not only recognize the clothing, I recognized the person. It was my sister's face, body, and way of moving. Children can be confidently wrong, of course. We see what we expect to see. Still, my friend also believed it was her. The fact that two people saw the same figure makes a private visual mistake less likely. Maybe my friend did not originally see as much as I did. Perhaps she only saw movement, then accepted my statement that it was my sister. Over time, hearing the story could have changed her memory until she also pictured the pink shirt, jeans, and ponytail. Shared memories can influence each other. That was the explanation I leaned toward for years. I assumed my friend had forgotten the incident completely. We did not talk about it much as we grew older, and the memory became something I carried privately. Then, on my 16th birthday, she brought it up. We were talking, celebrating, and thinking about old memories when she briefly mentioned the day we saw my sister upstairs even though she was not home. My heart dropped. She had remembered it without me reminding her. The way she referred to it showed that it had remained in her mind, too. This was not a story I had repeatedly told her until she accepted it. Years had passed, yet she knew exactly which day I meant. We did not continue the conversation for long. The memory made both of us uncomfortable. We quickly changed the subject. I think part of us was afraid that discussing it too deeply would make it feel present again. Her confirmation removed one of my easiest explanations. I could no longer tell myself I was the only person who saw the figure, and that everyone else remembered only my reaction. My friend saw her. My mother remembered our report. My sister was not home. The experience resembles stories of doppelgangers. A doppelganger is usually described as an exact copy of a living person appearing somewhere the real person is not. In some traditions, seeing one is considered a warning or bad omen. In other stories, the double behaves like an ordinary person, but ignores anyone who tries to interact with it. I did not know any of that when I was 9 or 10. To me, it was simply my sister being rude. That lack of fear at the beginning makes the memory feel especially real. I was not searching for a ghost. I did not wake from a nightmare. It was daytime, my friend was beside me, and my mother was downstairs. The house felt safe. I saw my older sister and reacted exactly as I normally would. Only later did the situation become impossible. The figure's behavior matches what bothers me most in doppelganger stories. It looked correct, but did not interact correctly. My sister should have responded to me. The copy did not. It continued the phone conversation without changing its rhythm, almost like a recording repeating the appearance of normal behavior. Maybe there was no person on the other end of the phone. Perhaps there was no real conversation at all. The figure might only have been moving its mouth and holding its hand near its head because that was an activity associated with my sister. It looked like her, but it did not understand the situation around it. That thought is much more frightening than seeing a transparent ghost. A ghost at least looks dead or unnatural. This figure looked completely alive. Only its behavior revealed something was wrong. I have wondered whether it was replaying a moment that had happened before. Maybe my sister had paced in that room while wearing the same outfit and speaking on the phone on another day. The house somehow repeated the image after she left. Some people believe locations can hold imprints of ordinary or emotional events, almost like recordings. If that is true, my friend and I may have witnessed a scene from the past. The figure ignored me because it was not aware of the present. It only repeated what my sister had previously done. That explanation would make the event more like a residual haunting than an intelligent copy. But why would such an ordinary moment be recorded? Nothing tragic happened while she spoke on the phone, as far as I know. And if it was an image from the past, why was it so solid and clear that two children believed she was physically present? Another possibility is that it was some kind of future glimpse. Maybe my sister later wore that exact outfit and paced in her room while speaking to a friend. My friend and I could have seen a moment before it happened. There are stories of people seeing someone arrive minutes before the real person enters, or hearing familiar footsteps before a family member comes home. But I have never confirmed whether my sister wore the pink shirt and jeans after the camping trip. Even if she did, that would be difficult to prove now. Memory could connect common clothing to almost any day. The figure may also have been connected to my sister rather than the house. Some people report seeing doubles of relatives shortly before that person becomes sick, injured, or emotionally distressed. My sister was camping, and I do not remember anything bad happening to her during the trip. She returned safely. There was no death or accident connected to the sighting. That makes the traditional omen interpretation less likely. Still, the experience deeply disturbed her when I eventually told her. She does not like talking about the idea that something identical to her was walking around her bedroom while she was miles away. I understand why. It would be frightening to imagine your family interacting with a copy of you in your own home. I sometimes wonder whether the figure wanted to be seen. It paced directly within our line of sight. The bedroom door was open. It stayed visible even after I shouted. If it had wanted to pass unnoticed, it could have moved away from the doorway. Instead, it continued until I became angry enough to go downstairs. Maybe the purpose was to send me to my mother. Maybe whatever happened next is the reason our memories fail. That thought makes the missing part of the day more frightening. What did my mother find when she went upstairs? Did the figure remain there? Did it disappear before we returned? Did something happen that none of us wanted to remember? There is no evidence of anything dramatic. My mother remembers the basic conversation, but not some hidden, terrifying event afterward. The rest of the day may be missing, simply because it was normal and unimportant. We probably went upstairs, found the room empty, and continued playing after my mother told us we imagined it. Children's memories often preserve the shocking moment while discarding everything around it. My friend and I may not remember the afternoon because there was nothing else worth remembering. That is the logical answer. But the sudden blankness feels wrong. The memory does not fade gradually. It seems to end. I can picture my mother standing near the sink. I hear her tell me my sister is camping. I remember the shock. Then there is almost nothing. Anxiety can affect memory. The brain sometimes fails to store details during moments of intense fear. Maybe that is all it was. My friend and I became frightened, and the rest of the day turned into a blur. I have also considered whether the experience was some kind of shared dream or altered state. Perhaps we had been tired and fell asleep while playing on the bed. We may have dreamed the figure together through conversation, then gone downstairs after waking. But shared dreams do not usually match so closely, and my mother remembers us reporting the event during the day. There was no evidence that we had slept. A gas leak or environmental issue could cause confusion and hallucinations. Carbon monoxide can affect multiple people in a house, but my mother was downstairs and did not experience anything unusual. We had no other symptoms like headache, dizziness, or sickness that I remember. The figure was the only strange thing. Sometimes I return to the exact image of my sister. She walks from one side of the bedroom to the other. The pink shirt moves naturally with her body. Her ponytail rests behind her head. She holds the phone to her ear. Her voice carries across the hallway. I tell her to shut up. She does not look at me. That is the moment when the memory feels wrong. If it were a ghostly vision, I would expect the figure to disappear or react strangely. Instead, it continues. It behaves like a video with no awareness of the viewers. My irritation delayed the fear because I believed I understood what I was seeing. Only when my mother corrected me did every ignored call become disturbing. My sister had not been choosing not to answer. The thing upstairs may not have been capable of answering. I have tried asking my mother more about the day. Her memory is similar to mine in some ways. She remembers that my friend and I came downstairs and said my sister was upstairs. She remembers telling us that was impossible because my sister was camping. She cannot explain what we saw. She may have checked the room and found nothing, though the details are no longer clear. My friend's memory also confirms the main parts without solving anything. She saw my sister. She knew my sister was not home. She remembers the day years later. That is all. My sister has heard the story, but it frightens her so much that we usually avoid the subject. She has no memory of sensing anything unusual while camping. She did not feel as though someone were copying her. She did not dream about home. As far as she knew, she spent an ordinary day away with a friend, while a version of her walked around her bedroom. Sometimes I wonder whether the copy was visible only from my room. If we had entered the hallway, would the bedroom have been empty? Maybe it was connected to the angle between the two doorways, like an image or reflection. There may have been a mirror, window, or polished surface that created an illusion. Could we have been seeing a reflection from another part of the house? The layout was direct. and I knew the room well. There was no television showing my sister or large mirror positioned to create a full moving image. Even if there were, it would not explain the voice. The figure seemed physically inside the room. Another thought is that we saw someone through a window beyond the room. Maybe a teenage girl outside lined up with the doorway and appeared to be inside. But the bedroom was on the second floor. No one could pace at that height outside without standing on a roof or raised structure. The movement followed the room's interior. She was not beyond the house. I do not have a final explanation. The older I become, the less comfortable I am calling it a simple childhood mistake. Children misidentify shadows, but two children saw the same detailed person. Children misunderstand schedules, but my sister and mother confirmed she was away. Memories change, but my friend independently mentioned the event years later. Something happened. Whether it was paranormal, psychological, or an unusual visual illusion, I do not know. I only know that I saw my sister in a place where she could not have been. She looked completely real. That may be what frightened me most after I understood. There was no warning, no transparent skin, no glowing eyes, no unnatural body. If she had responded when I shouted, I might have walked into her room. I might have stood beside her. I might have reached out and touched her. Sometimes I think about that possibility. What would have happened if I had crossed the hallway instead of going downstairs? Would the figure have disappeared as I entered? Would it have turned toward me? Would it have continued pacing as though I were not there? Or would it finally have stopped pretending to be my sister? I am glad I chose to tell my mother instead. For years, I tried to believe the memory belonged only to me. Then, my friend mentioned it on my 16th birthday. She did not need help remembering. She knew exactly what we had seen. My heart dropped because her memory confirmed that I was not alone in mine. We changed the subject quickly, and we rarely discuss it now. My sister does not like hearing about it. My mother cannot explain it. My friend remembers it, but does not want to stay with the subject. I still get chills whenever I picture that room across the hall. The open doorway, the pink shirt, the ponytail, the phone held against her ear, my voice calling out again and again while she continued pacing. For a few minutes, I believed my sister was ignoring me. The truth was worse. My sister was not in the house. Whatever was walking around her bedroom had simply looked exactly like her. Or 2008, when I was staying overnight at my best friend's house. His parents were divorced, and they each had their own place, so sometimes we stayed with his mother and other times with his dad. On this particular night, we were at his dad's house, which stood in one of the older neighborhoods in the area. The house itself was old and a little dated, but it was comfortable. It had the kind of worn-in feeling that older family homes sometimes have. The furniture did not match perfectly. The floors made small noises when people walked across them, and the rooms looked as though they had not been renovated for many years. Still, it felt warm and familiar rather than frightening. I had stayed there before, and nothing unusual had ever happened. The neighborhood was equally old. Most of the houses had been built close to the road, with small front gardens, porches, and mature trees along the street. At night, it became extremely quiet. There was not much traffic, especially after midnight, and there were no businesses nearby that stayed open late enough to bring people into the area. Our routine during sleepovers was always about the same. We would play video games for hours, eat junk food, drink too much soda, and talk about anything that came into our heads. We were young enough that staying awake past midnight still felt like we were doing something exciting, even though all we were really doing was sitting in a bedroom surrounded by empty snack bags and game controllers. That night was no different. We played games until around 1 in the morning and eventually decided we were tired enough to stop. We turned everything off, settled into the room, and tried to sleep. We almost never fell asleep immediately. Once the television and games were off, we would usually spend another hour talking in the darkness. Those conversations could go anywhere. Sometimes we talked about school or people we knew. Other times we discussed what we wanted to do with our lives, where we might live when we were older, or what the future would look like. We also liked strange theories. We talked about ghosts, secret government projects, the end of the world, and things we had seen in movies or read online. Most of it was not serious. We were entertaining ourselves and seeing who could come up with the craziest idea. That night, the conversation turned to aliens. We started discussing whether intelligent life existed somewhere else in the universe. We talked about how large space was and how unlikely it seemed that Earth could be the only planet with life. We wondered whether aliens had already visited, whether governments knew about them, and whether ordinary people might see things they could not explain. There was nothing frightening about the conversation at first. We were lying in the dark, half joking and half serious, imagining what extraterrestrial life might look like. The bedroom window faced the street, and the curtains or blinds were open enough for us to see the darkness outside. Then, a bright blue flash filled the window. The entire room lit up for a second. It happened so suddenly that both of us stopped speaking. We turned toward the window, then looked at each other. The fuck was that? Neither of us had an answer. The flash had been too bright to ignore. It was not a small light passing across the ceiling or a reflection from a distant television. It had illuminated the window and part of the bedroom with a sharp blue glow. Our first thought was that a car had driven past. Headlights can sweep across a room, especially when a vehicle turns at the end of a street. Sometimes, emergency vehicles produce blue flashes that reflect from windows before you hear the siren, but there had been no engine sound. No car passed in front of the house. From my friend's bedroom, we had a direct line of sight to the street. If a vehicle had driven by, we should have seen it. We waited and listened. The neighborhood remained silent. There were no sirens in the distance. No doors opened. No footsteps moved outside. We started discussing possible explanations, but before we could settle on one, the blue flash happened again. This time, it was brighter. The light filled the window so strongly that we could see the shape of the room for a moment. The walls, furniture, and everything around us seemed washed in an unnatural blue color. We sat up immediately. Neither of us was laughing anymore. We moved closer to the window and looked outside. The street appeared empty. There were no cars parked with their headlights on, and no vehicles moving through the neighborhood. No plane was passing overhead. We could not hear a helicopter, and there was no storm. The sky looked calm. If lightning had caused the flash, we should have heard thunder at some point. The color also seemed wrong. Lightning can appear blue or white, but this did not seem to come from the sky. It looked closer. The light felt as though it came from somewhere near the houses. We kept watching. At first, nothing happened. The street remained dark beneath the weak glow of the streetlights. The neighbors' houses were quiet, and most of their windows were black. Then, the blue light appeared again. This time, it was across the street near the neighbor's house. It did not flash and disappear. It hovered. A bright blue light was suspended in front of one of the neighbor's windows. I cannot remember its exact size with complete confidence. It may have been as small as a basketball or much larger. At night, with no clear object behind it, it was difficult to judge distance and scale. What I do remember is the color. It was an intense blue, brighter than any ordinary porch light or lamp. It did not look like a light bulb attached to the house. It looked separate, as though it was floating in the air. There was no visible object holding it, no wires, no person standing beneath it. It simply remained in front of the window. My friend and I stared at it without knowing what to say. We had just been talking about aliens, which made the timing feel almost ridiculous. If this had happened while we were discussing anything else, we might have immediately blamed an electrical problem or a neighbor playing with a flashlight. Because of the conversation, our minds went directly to something unexplained. Still, we tried to remain logical. Maybe someone in the neighbor's house was shining a blue light against the glass. A television could have created a strong glow. A police car might have been parked somewhere out of sight, with its emergency lights reflecting from the window. But the light did not spread across the glass the way a reflection normally would. It seemed to have a position in the air. It hovered in front of the house rather than appearing flat against it. It also remained steady. There was no flickering pattern, no movement from a person holding a torch, and no changing colors. Only a bright blue glow suspended outside. It stayed there for what felt like several minutes. That was long enough for us to look carefully, question each other, and make sure we were seeing the same thing. I asked my friend whether he saw it in front of the window or inside the room. He said it looked outside to him, too. We watched for a shadow or a person to pass behind it. Nothing did. There was no sound. That silence made the sight more disturbing. Something bright enough to light part of the street should have made some kind of noise if it were a machine. A drone would have buzzed. A vehicle would have had an engine. Electrical equipment might have hummed or cracked. The light was completely quiet. Then it vanished. It did not shoot away. It did not fade slowly. One moment, it hovered in front of the neighbor's window. The next, it was gone. My friend and I remained at the window, staring at the empty space. We were frightened, but we were also extremely curious. Neither of us wanted to look away in case it came back. We debated whether to wake his father. The problem was that we had no idea what we would tell him. A strange blue light had flashed through the bedroom and then floated outside a neighbor's house. By the time he came into the room, there might be nothing to see. We also did not want to be laughed at or told we had imagined it because we had stayed awake too long. So we waited. For around 30 minutes, nothing happened. We remained awake, watching the street and discussing possibilities in quiet voices. Maybe it had been ball lightning. We had heard of rare glowing spheres appearing during storms, though there had been no storm that night. Ball lightning is often described as floating, glowing, and disappearing suddenly. The color can vary, and some reports describe blue or white light. That explanation seemed possible until we remembered the first two flashes. Had the light been moving between the houses? Maybe it had appeared close to our window, then crossed the street. Perhaps the flashes were caused when it moved too quickly for us to see its full shape. We also considered an electrical transformer. A damaged transformer can produce an intense blue flash. If power equipment across the street was failing, that could explain the color. But there had been no explosion. The lights in the house never went out. There was no buzzing, smoke, or fire. A transformer would not hover silently in front of a window for several minutes. We thought about a powerful flashlight. Someone could have been playing a prank, shining a blue filtered light toward the houses. But the street was empty, and the light seemed too concentrated. It did not move like a beam controlled by a person's hand. After half an hour with no further activity, we began thinking it was over. We were still nervous, but tiredness started returning. We may have moved away from the window slightly or tried to settle back down. Then the blue light appeared again. This time it was in the middle of the street. It did not simply flash. It moved. The glowing light slowly traveled down the center of the road. It stayed low, though I cannot say exactly how high above the ground it was. It may have been several feet in the air, or close enough to the street to seem almost level with a person's head. The movement was smooth. It did not bounce like a flashlight carried by someone walking. It did not drift unpredictably like a balloon caught in the wind. It moved in a controlled, steady direction along the road. My friend and I pressed closer to the window. We watched it travel past the houses. There was still no visible object connected to it. No vehicle drove beneath it. No person followed. It was only the blue light, moving alone down the middle of the empty street at 1 in the morning. The longer we watched, the less human it seemed. If it was a person with a light, we should have seen a body at some point. The blue glow was bright enough that it should have illuminated whoever carried it. But nothing appeared inside the light. There were no legs beneath it, no hands around it, no shadow following behind. It moved as though it did not need anything to carry it. We could not hear a motor. The neighborhood remained completely quiet. We followed it with our eyes as it moved toward the far end of the street. The light did not speed up or slow down. It continued at the same steady pace until it reached the end of the road. Then it sank into the ground. That is the only way I can describe it. It did not switch off while hovering. It did not pass behind a tree, car, or building. The light moved downward and disappeared below the level of the street, as though it had entered the earth. My friend and I stared at the place where it vanished. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. There was no hole, drain, or underground entrance visible from where we were. Even if there had been a dip in the road, the light would still have needed a physical source. Instead, it looked like a glowing object had simply traveled into the ground. After that, we were both completely awake. Whatever chance we had of sleeping normally was gone. We spent the rest of the night discussing what we had seen. The alien conversation now felt much less funny. We wondered whether the light had somehow reacted to us talking about extraterrestrial life. Logically, that made no sense. A floating object outside could not know what two teenagers were discussing inside a bedroom. Still, the timing was difficult to ignore. We had been lying there wondering whether aliens were real when the first blue flash appeared. It felt like an answer. Maybe that interpretation was only created by fear. If we had been talking about ghosts, we might have thought the light was a spirit. If we had been discussing weather, we would have called it lightning. The conversation shaped the meaning we gave the event. But it did not create the light. Both of us saw it. We described the same movement, color, and disappearance. We were not asleep. We had been talking continuously before the first flash, and the event kept us awake for hours afterward. There was no moment when either of us believed we had dreamed it. The next morning, the street looked completely normal. There was no sign of damage where the light had vanished. No burned patch, broken pavement, or unusual object lay at the end of the road. The neighbor's house looked ordinary in daylight. We may have checked the window where the light hovered, but there was nothing attached to it, and no visible blue lamp. No one came outside talking about strange activity from the night before. If the neighbors saw the light, they never told us. We considered asking them, but the idea felt embarrassing. We would have sounded like two kids who stayed up too late discussing aliens and frightened themselves with a reflection. I do not remember whether we told my friend's father immediately. If we did, he did not give us an explanation that stayed with me. Adults often dismiss strange childhood experiences because they were not present to see them. He may have blamed headlights, a police vehicle, or someone with a flashlight. But there had been no car. The street was directly visible from the window, and both of us were watching carefully by the time the light traveled down it. A police vehicle would have been impossible to miss. Its lights would have flashed in a repeating pattern, and the car itself would have moved along the road. This was one continuous blue glow. Another possible explanation is a drone. Today, drones are common enough that a hovering light outside a window would be easy to explain. A small drone with bright LEDs could move down a street, remain in one place, and disappear behind an obstacle. But this happened in 2007 or 2008. Consumer drones existed, but they were far less common, especially in an older residential neighborhood at 1 in the morning. They were also noisy. A drone close enough to hover near a neighbor's window should have produced an obvious buzzing sound. We heard nothing. A remote-controlled helicopter might have created a similar effect, but again, there was no sound and no visible body. The light also seemed too bright to come from a small toy. It illuminated the area around it without revealing any machine inside. A weather balloon or floating lantern is another possibility. A lantern can drift silently and glow brightly, but it would usually appear orange or yellow, not intense blue. It would move with the wind rather than travel in a straight, controlled path down the center of a road. It would not hover in front of a window for minutes and then sink directly into the ground. A blue balloon with a light attached could behave strangely if caught in air currents, but the movement we saw looked deliberate. Maybe it only seemed controlled because of our viewing angle. Distance and darkness can make random motion appear smooth. Still, the light followed the street itself, as if using the road. We also considered reflections. The glass in the window could reflect light from inside the bedroom, making an object appear outside when it was actually behind us. But the room was dark. The television and video games were off. There was no blue light inside that could create the image. The first flashes illuminated the room from outside. We saw the glow on the neighbor's house and moving along the street, which would not happen with a simple reflection. The possibility of ball lightning continued to interest me as I became older. It is one of the few natural phenomena that can involve floating balls of light behaving in ways that seem impossible. Reports describe lights entering houses, moving through the air, hovering, and vanishing suddenly. Some people say they saw ball lightning travel close to the ground. Others describe it as blue. The problem is that ball lightning is usually associated with thunderstorms or strong electrical activity. The night was calm. There was no rain, thunder, or wind that I remember. Even if ball lightning explained the floating glow, seeing it multiple times over more than half an hour would be unusual. The light appeared near our window, then across the street, vanished, and later returned in the road. That pattern felt less like a natural electrical event and more like something moving through the neighborhood. I have also thought about an electrical arc traveling along underground cables. A fault in the power system could produce blue light, especially near the street where electrical lines might run below the ground. The final disappearance into the earth could have happened near a utility access point, but an electrical fault moving openly through the air would likely cause explosions, power loss, or damage. There would have been sound. The light would not hover in front of a second-floor window. Nothing in the neighborhood seemed affected the next day. There is, of course, the paranormal explanation. Some people report seeing ghost lights, will-o'-the-wisps, or unexplained glowing orbs. These lights are sometimes connected to old roads, graveyards, swamps, or places where someone died. They may hover, follow people, or disappear into the ground. I do not know the history of the neighborhood well enough to say whether anything happened there. The houses were old and many families had lived in them. The ground beneath the street may have existed as a field, path, or something else long before the neighborhood was built. Maybe the light was connected to the land. Maybe it followed a route that no longer existed. That idea would explain why it traveled down the center of the street and sank into the earth. It may not have been following the modern road at all. It could have been moving along an older path beneath it. That is only speculation. The alien explanation is equally impossible to prove. The light could have been a probe, some small device observing the neighborhood. Its movement appeared controlled, and it did not behave like any aircraft we recognized. Perhaps the first flashes happened when it approached the house. It then hovered near the neighbor's window, as though looking inside. Later, it traveled down the road and entered an underground location. The fact that we were discussing aliens before it appeared makes that theory tempting, but there is no real evidence connecting the two. We saw no craft, beings, or physical object, only light. My friend and I continued talking about the experience long after that night. Our memories remained consistent. Neither of us later admitted to playing a prank or mistaking something obvious. We both remembered the first blue flash. We remembered the second, brighter one. We remembered the light hovering across the street. And we remembered it moving down the middle of the road before sinking into the ground. That shared memory is why I trust that something real happened. People can misidentify real objects together. We may be completely wrong about what the light was. But we did not invent it. If I had been alone, I might have convinced myself I fell asleep during our conversation. I might have called the blue light part of a dream. Instead, my friend reacted at the same moment. He saw the room light up. He watched the street beside me. We questioned each other while the light was still visible. Years have passed, and I have never seen anything like it again. I have seen emergency lights reflected from windows. I have watched drones at night. I have seen transformers explode, distant lightning, fireworks, aircraft, and strange reflections. None of them looked like the blue light from that street. The closest comparisons explain only one part. A transformer can create the color, but not the movement. A drone can hover and travel, but not remain silent or appear to sink into solid ground. Ball lightning can behave unpredictably, but usually appears during storms. A flashlight can shine through a window, but requires someone to hold it. Every explanation solves one detail and fails on the others. The part I remember most clearly is the way the light moved at the end. It did not rush away as if it had been discovered. It did not flicker weakly and die. It traveled slowly down the road, almost calmly, while two people watched from a bedroom window. Then it reached the end and lowered itself into the ground. It behaved as if that was exactly where it intended to go. We did not sleep much after that. We stayed awake trying to explain it, repeating the details so neither of us could later claim we had misunderstood. The old house made its usual sounds around us, but every creak now felt connected to what was outside. We kept checking the window, expecting the blue glow to return. It never did. By morning, the event was over. The street was ordinary again. People woke, cars began moving, and daylight erased every trace of the strange thing that had traveled through the neighborhood. I still do not know what we saw. I cannot say it was alien, supernatural, or even truly unexplained in a scientific sense. There may be a rare electrical or atmospheric explanation I have never learned. What I know is that it was not a dream. My friend and I were both awake. There were no vehicles on the street and no planes above us. The light was bright enough to illuminate the bedroom. It hovered in front of the neighbor's window for several minutes. Then, after disappearing for around half an hour, it returned and traveled alone down the road. I can still picture that blue glow moving through the darkness. It reached the end of the street, lowered toward the ground, and vanished beneath it. We had spent the night discussing whether there might be life beyond Earth. Then something appeared outside the window that neither of us could identify. Maybe the timing meant nothing. Maybe it was only a coincidence. But even now, whenever I think about the possibility of something unknown watching us from the darkness, I remember that bedroom. I remember the first blue flash, and I remember the silent light hovering across the street as though it had stopped to look inside. When I was a young child, I used to have the same kind of nightmare again and again. The details sometimes changed, but one thing always remained the same. There was a very tall man-shaped figure standing somewhere inside my bedroom, watching me while I slept. I could never see a face, clothes, or any clear features. He looked completely black, darker than the shadows around him, almost like a person-shaped hole cut into the room. Even when the bedroom was almost completely dark, I could still tell where he was because the shape of his body seemed deeper and heavier than the rest of the darkness. He was tall enough that his head appeared close to the ceiling, and he never seemed to move while I looked directly at him. He simply stood there, silent and still, facing my bed. Sometimes I woke in the middle of the night and thought I could hear breathing somewhere in the room. It was slow, heavy, and close enough that I would pull the blanket over my head and try not to move. I would listen carefully, trying to decide whether the sound came from me, from somewhere outside, or from another person standing nearby. Whenever I became frightened enough, I called for my mother. She would come into the room, turn on the light, and check around the bed, inside the closet, and behind the door. She never found anyone. She always told me it was only a dream, or that the breathing was probably the sound of the house, the wind, or my own breath echoing beneath the blankets. She wanted to calm me, and I wanted to believe her, but once the light was switched off again, I could not stop imagining the tall black figure returning to the same corner. The nightmares continued for a long time. I became used to waking afraid, though I never truly became comfortable with it. I sometimes slept facing the wall so I would not see the rest of the room. Other nights, I kept a small light on or left the bedroom door open. I thought that if the hallway light reached far enough into the room, the man would not be able to stand there without being seen. But even with a light nearby, I sometimes dreamed of him. He did not need complete darkness. He seemed to bring his own darkness with him. Then one day, the nightmares stopped. There was no final dream and no clear reason. I simply began sleeping normally. I no longer woke to the sound of breathing, and I stopped seeing the black figure standing over me. At first, I waited for him to return. Every dark coat, hanging towel, or shadow in the corner made me nervous. But months passed, then years. Eventually, the figure became something from childhood. One of those strange fears you remember, but no longer expect to face again. I began to believe my mother had been right. Maybe it had only been a repeating nightmare caused by an active imagination. Children can create frightening characters and see them so often in dreams that they begin to feel real. I thought I had grown out of it. Then, last year, the man came back. The first dream began in a bathroom. I was standing in front of the sink, brushing my teeth. Everything looked completely normal. The lights were on, the mirror showed my face, and I could hear the small sounds of the toothbrush and running water. There was nothing frightening about the scene at first. Then, I looked into the mirror and saw a hand behind me. It was not my hand. The fingers were long and black, and they appeared in the reflection over my shoulder. The rest of the body remained outside the part of the mirror I could see, but I knew immediately who the hand belonged to. Even after all those years, I recognized him without seeing his face. It was the same tall shadow figure from my childhood. I spun around, but there was no one directly behind me. I rushed toward the bathroom door and pulled it open. I wanted to get into the hallway and run as far away as possible. But before stepping out, I noticed the hallway window. The glass was dark enough to show a reflection of the space behind me. The man was there. He stood directly behind me in the reflection, so close that his chest almost touched my back. I could not see him when I turned my head, but the window showed him clearly. His body stretched high above mine, and his black shape filled the doorway. Before I could scream or run, I woke up. I opened my eyes in bed with my heart beating hard. The room was dark, and for several seconds I was afraid to move. I expected to see the figure somewhere nearby, but the room appeared empty. I told myself it had only been a dream. The old childhood fear had returned because I had been thinking about it, or because stress had brought back a memory. I tried to ignore it. Then I had another dream. In this one, my sister was outside on the playground directly in front of our house. She was playing with her friends in the daylight. I could hear children talking and laughing, and everything seemed safe. I stood closer to the house, watching her. Then I noticed someone behind the trees. The tall black man stood between the trunks. He was partly hidden at first, but I could see enough of his body to know it was him. He did not move while I watched. He only faced me from the trees. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, he was closer. He had left the trees and now stood near the edge of the playground. I blinked again. He was closer to the house. Every time my eyelids closed, even for a fraction of a second, he crossed a large distance without walking. I never saw his legs move. He simply appeared in a new place each time I looked again. I tried to keep my eyes open, but it became impossible. My eyes burned, and my body forced me to blink. Now he was directly in front of the house. I blinked once more. He was standing beside me. I felt his hand touch me. Then both of his hands moved toward my neck. His fingers closed around my throat, and he began to squeeze. I could not breathe. I tried to pull his hands away, but they felt too strong. I kicked and struggled while his featureless face remained above me. The pressure around my neck became unbearable. Then I woke up. I sat upright, gasping for air. My throat felt tight, and my chest hurt as though I had truly been fighting to breathe. I touched my neck, expecting to find fingerprints or bruises, but there were no marks. Once again, I told myself it was only a nightmare. More dreams followed. I do not remember every one of them clearly, but the man appeared often enough that I began fearing sleep again. Sometimes he stood at the end of a hallway. Sometimes I saw him through a window or in a mirror. He rarely approached me normally. He appeared closer whenever I looked away, blinked, or turned my head. He seemed to understand that I could not watch every direction at once. The dream that frightened me most happened last week. It began in the bathroom again. I was brushing my teeth in front of the mirror. The scene was so ordinary that I did not realize I was dreaming. I could taste the toothpaste, feel the toothbrush in my hand, and hear water running into the sink. Every detail felt real. I bent forward and spat the toothpaste into the basin. Then I looked back at the mirror. My reflection had not moved. The person in the glass was still standing upright, holding the toothbrush near their mouth. Its eyes remained fixed forward while I stood bent over the sink. For a moment, I could not understand what I was seeing. I slowly straightened. The reflection stayed in the same position. It looked exactly like me, but it no longer followed my body. It was like an image that had become frozen while I continued moving outside the glass. Then I noticed something behind the shower curtain. There was a dark shape inside the shower. The curtain hid most of it, but I could see the outline of someone standing there. The figure was too tall for a normal person. The top of its head seemed close to the ceiling, and the rest of its body formed a black column behind the thin material. I did not wait for it to pull back the curtain. I ran out of the bathroom and rushed into my bedroom. I closed the door and climbed into bed. My heart beat so quickly that it felt like a small animal trapped inside my chest. I pulled the blanket around myself and tried to calm down. I remember thinking that if I could fall asleep, the fear would disappear. That thought should have told me I was already dreaming, but it did not. I lay there for what felt like a long time. The house became quiet. Eventually, my breathing slowed, and I fell asleep inside the dream. Then I woke again. The digital clock beside the bed showed exactly 3 a.m. The room was dark. I turned over. He was standing in the corner. The tall, black man was inside my bedroom, in the same kind of place where I had seen him as a child. He stood facing the bed, completely still, watching me. At first, I assumed I was still dreaming. I pinched my arm hard. I felt the pain. I did not wake up. I pinched myself again. The room stayed the same. The clock still showed 3 a.m. The figure remained in the corner. I moved my hands, touched the blanket, and looked around. Everything felt solid and real. My heart was racing, but I was awake enough to understand what I was doing. The man did not disappear. He did not move toward me. He simply watched. I wanted to scream, but fear seemed to close my throat. I could not stop staring at him because I believed that if I looked away, he would move closer, just as he did in the playground dream. I watched the outline of his shoulders and head. There was no face, no eyes, no mouth. Still, I felt certain he was looking directly at me. I do not know how long I remained that way. It may have been only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. At some point, the figure disappeared or the room changed. I cannot clearly remember the moment he left. I only remember being awake afterward, unable to sleep, convinced that this time had been different from the others. In the earlier dreams, I always woke and understood that the man had not been physically present. This time, I believed I had already woken up. I tested it by pinching myself, and I felt the pain without escaping the scene. That convinced me he had been real. Since that night, I have struggled with insomnia. I stay awake much later than I should because I do not want to see him again. When I finally sleep, I wake often and immediately check the corners of the room. I avoid mirrors in darkness, and I do not like leaving the bathroom shower curtain closed. I sometimes open it before brushing my teeth so I can see that no one is standing behind it. No one believes me when I say the figure was really there. People tell me it was a nightmare or sleep paralysis. I understand why they say that. Sleep can create experiences that feel completely real. A person can wake mentally while the body remains partly asleep. During that state, the brain may continue producing dream images inside the real bedroom. Many people see dark human figures standing in corners, beside the bed or near doors. Some hear breathing, footsteps, or whispering. Others feel pressure on their chest or hands around their neck. The figure from my childhood could have been connected to that. Young children often experience night terrors, vivid dreams, or hallucinations during the moments between sleeping and waking. The breathing noises may have been part of those experiences. My mother entered the room and found nothing because there was no physical person there. The choking dream might also have had a normal cause. I may have been sleeping in a position that made breathing difficult. My brain could have turned the physical feeling into the image of the man grabbing my throat. When I woke gasping, it seemed like proof that the attack happened, even though the breathing problem may have come first. The 3 a.m. encounter could have been a false awakening. A false awakening happens when someone dreams that they have woken up. The bedroom looks correct, the the clock seems real, and the person may get out of bed or perform tests to prove they are awake. They can pinch themselves and feel pain because dreams are capable of creating physical sensations. The dream may continue even after the person becomes convinced they are conscious. That explanation fits what happened. I dreamed that I brushed my teeth, saw the unmoving reflection, ran to my bedroom, fell asleep, and woke at 3 a.m. The entire sequence may have been several layers of one dream. Pinching myself did not wake me because I was still inside it. The figure in the corner may not have existed outside my mind. I know that is possible, but knowing the explanation does not erase the fear. While I was looking at him, the room felt completely real. The clock, bed, blankets, and pain in my arm all behaved exactly as they should. There was no strange dream logic. Nothing floated or changed shape. Only the man was impossible. That is what makes false awakenings so frightening. They remove the moment of relief that normally comes after a nightmare. You believe you escaped, only to discover the dream followed you into your bedroom. I have also wondered why the same figure has returned for so many years. Dreams usually change. Monsters take different forms, and fears shift as people grow older. But the tall black man from my childhood looks the same now. Maybe my brain uses him as a symbol for fear. Because he frightened me when I was young, my mind brings him back whenever I am stressed, anxious, or sleeping badly. He has become the shape my nightmares give to danger. Mirrors appear often in the newer dreams, too. In one, I saw his hand behind me. In another, my reflection stopped moving. Mirrors are disturbing because they show what is behind us, while also showing a copy of our own body. In dreams, they often behave incorrectly because the mind has difficulty creating a perfect reflection. The strange mirror scenes may be proof that the experiences are dreams rather than supernatural events. A real mirror would not leave my reflection frozen. A dream mirror can. Still, during the dream, the wrong reflection felt like a warning that something had entered the room. The man is often revealed through reflections before I see him directly. It is as though he can remain hidden from my eyes, but not from glass. Sometimes I think he is only waiting for me to notice him. Other times, I wonder whether he has always been nearby, and the dreams are the only moments when I can see him. That thought makes sleeping even harder, so I try not to believe it. Insomnia itself can make the problem worse. The less a person sleeps, the more vivid dreams and hallucinations can become. Exhaustion makes the boundary between sleeping and waking less stable. Shadows appear to move, familiar objects look like people, and small sounds become threatening. Fear of the man keeps me awake. Lack of sleep makes it easier to see him. Then seeing him creates more fear. It becomes a cycle. There are practical things that may help, even though I still feel frightened. Keeping a regular sleep schedule, reducing caffeine, leaving a soft light on, and speaking to a doctor or sleep specialist could make the dreams less frequent. If the visions continue while I am fully awake and moving around, that would be important to tell a medical professional too. Talking to someone would not mean the experience was fake. It would only mean I deserve help sleeping and feeling safe again. For now, I check my room before getting into bed. I make sure the closet is closed, the shower is empty, and nothing in the corner could create a human shape. I sometimes take a picture of the room with my phone because the camera sees shadows differently. When the picture shows nothing, I feel better for a few minutes. Then I turn off the light. The darkness gathers in the same places. I remember being a small child and hearing slow breathing beside my bed. I remember my mother telling me it was only a dream. For years, I thought I had escaped the man because the nightmare stopped. Now, I am no longer sure he ever left. Maybe he is a figure created by my sleeping brain, returning whenever stress and exhaustion give him a way back into my dreams. That is the explanation I try to accept, because it means he cannot truly hurt me. But last week, I looked directly at him after I believed I was awake. I pinched myself. I felt pain. The clock showed 3 in the morning, and the tall black shape stood silently in the corner, watching me just as it had when I was a child. Perhaps it was a false awakening. Perhaps my mind created everything. That is what people tell me. And they may be right. But when I close my eyes now, I do not fear the nightmares most. I fear opening them and finding him already there.
Quick pause, then we're right back. A lot of people watch one story and leave, but some stick around. They hit subscribe and come back every night. If you want to be one of them, the button's right there. Turn on the bell too, so you never miss a new one. That's it. Let's get back to the story.
When I was around 14 years old, my older brother was about 19, and he had a habit of staying out very late. He would leave during the evening, meet friends, and sometimes come home long after everyone else had gone to bed. It was normal enough that no one panicked when he was not home by midnight, but he was also not the most organized person. His phone was almost always broken, dead, lost, or impossible to reach. So there were many nights when he had no way to call the house and ask someone to let him in. We lived in a small village in England, almost in the middle of nowhere. It was not the kind of place where people walked around at 1 in the morning. Once the pubs closed and the roads became quiet, the village felt almost completely empty. There was a main road behind our property, but traffic became rare late at night. Beyond the back garden stood a factory that made things like pillows, blankets, and other soft household products. During the day, there could be workers, vehicles, and machinery nearby. But at night, especially around 1 in the morning, the place was usually silent. Our house was built on sloping ground. It is difficult to explain exactly without seeing it, but because the land dropped away toward the back, the rear of the house sat higher above the ground than the front. It was not standing on stilts, but it felt raised. The back bedroom windows were not at a height where someone could simply stand in the garden and reach them. A person would need some kind of ladder, platform, or serious effort to get close enough to touch the glass. There was also a large fence around the garden. It was not impossible to climb, but it made entering the property much harder. The fence sometimes fell or leaned during long periods of strong wind, but on an ordinary night. No one could casually walk into the garden without making noise or taking time to get over it. My bedroom was at the back of the house. That detail matters because before moving into that room, I had slept in a bedroom at the front. When I was still in the front room, my brother had developed a method for getting my attention whenever he came home without a key or working phone. He would stand outside and throw small stones at my window. I would hear the light taps against the glass, look outside, and see him waiting below. Then I would go downstairs and unlock the front door for him. He never threw stones at my parents' window because he knew that would get him into serious trouble. Waking me was safer. I might be annoyed, but I would usually let him in without making a big issue out of it. After I changed bedrooms, that method no longer worked. My new room was at the back of the house, high above the sloping garden. My brother could not stand below and throw stones accurately at the window. The angle was wrong, the distance was too great, and the fence made reaching the correct position difficult. By the time this story happened, a year or 2 had passed since I moved rooms. My brother was also trusted with his own house key. He no longer needed me to wake up and let him inside. Still, old habits stay in your mind. When you hear a familiar sound in the middle of the night, you often accept the first explanation that matches your memory. That night, it must have been around 1 in the morning. The rest of the house was quiet. My parents and siblings were asleep, and I was either lying in bed or still awake in the darkness. My curtains were closed, as they almost always were. Even now, I prefer keeping curtains shut at night. I never liked the feeling of a dark window looking into my room. With the curtains closed, I could not see the glass or anything outside it. Then I heard tapping. It came directly from my bedroom window. At first, I did not feel afraid. The sound was familiar enough that my mind immediately connected it to my brother. It sounded like someone trying to get my attention, exactly the way he had done when I slept at the front of the house. Tap, 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 the noise was not random. It did not sound like rain, because the night was not wet and the drops were too deliberate. It did not sound like something being blown around by the wind. Each tap seemed separated from the next, like fingers or fingernails touching the glass. It genuinely sounded as though someone was standing outside and tapping with a hand. My first thought was that my brother had somehow returned to his old method. Maybe he had forgotten his key. Perhaps he had lost it during the night or given it to someone else. His phone was probably broken again, so he could not call. I did not immediately remember that my bedroom was now almost impossible to reach from outside. Sleepiness and familiarity overpowered logic. I lay there for a moment, listening. The tapping continued. It was not loud enough to wake the entire house, but it was clear inside my room. Whoever or whatever was making it seemed to know exactly how much force to use. I began trying to understand how my brother had reached the window. Maybe he had climbed the fence and found a place to stand. The ground at the back was sloped, but perhaps there was a bin, wall, or object he could climb onto. Maybe the fence had fallen again and allowed him to get closer. I pictured him standing outside, cold and annoyed, waiting for me to respond. I did not open the curtains. That is something I still think about. If I truly believed it was my brother, I should have looked outside to confirm it. But even before I consciously felt afraid, some part of me did not want to see what was on the other side of the glass. I told myself it was because the room was dark and I was tired. I got out of bed instead. The tapping continued behind me while I crossed the room. I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway, planning to go downstairs and unlock the back door. The back entrance seemed more logical because the sound had come from the rear of the house. If my brother had somehow climbed into the garden, he would be waiting there. The moment I opened my bedroom door, I heard another sound from downstairs. The front door was opening. I stopped in the hallway. The lock turned. The door moved inside its frame. Then my brother came into the house through the front entrance. He had used his key. For a second, my mind did not connect what that meant. I saw him entering normally, probably trying to stay quiet so he would not wake our parents. He was at the opposite end of the house from my window. The tapping was still happening behind me. I could hear it from inside my bedroom. Tap, tap, tap. My brother stepped through the front door. Then the tapping stopped. The timing was exact. It did not fade away slowly or continue for several minutes after he entered. It stopped as he came inside, almost as though whatever had been at my window knew he had arrived. I stood there, staring toward him. There was no possible way he had made the sound. The front door was at the front of the house. My bedroom window was at the back. Even if he had somehow thrown stones against my window, he could not have reached the front entrance before the tapping ended. The distance around the house was too great. He would have needed to leave the back garden, climb the fence again, run around the entire building, reach the front door, take out his key, and unlock it in only a few seconds. And the tapping had continued while the front door was already opening. He could not be in two places at once. I remember feeling the fear arrive all at once. Before that moment, the tapping was only an inconvenience. I thought my brother wanted to be let inside. As soon as I saw him at the front door, the sound changed in my mind. Now it was something standing outside my elevated bedroom window in the middle of the night. Something had been tapping with what sounded like fingers. Something was close enough to touch the glass. I did not go back into the room immediately. I may have asked my brother whether he had been around the back of the house, though I already knew the answer. He had entered normally from the street. He had not climbed into the garden or thrown anything. He probably looked at me strangely because I seemed frightened. I explained what I heard. The tapping had begun while he was still outside. It continued until the exact moment he opened the front door. There were no trees near my side of the house. That was one of the first normal explanations I tried to find. A branch tapping against glass can sound almost exactly like fingers. Wind moves it back and forth, creating a regular pattern. But there was no tree close enough for a branch to reach my window. No bush stood at that height. Nothing grew against the wall. The house's raised position made the lack of explanation worse. An animal seemed possible. A bird could have landed on the ledge and pecked the glass. A bat might have struck the window. A large insect could create tapping sounds, though probably not loud enough to resemble a hand. But most animals would not produce such a slow, deliberate rhythm. They would scratch, flutter, or move unpredictably. This sounded controlled. Someone was knocking. I refused to open the curtains. My brother may have offered to look, or perhaps neither of us wanted to. I do not remember us going outside immediately. The idea of entering the dark garden and standing beneath the window was terrifying. If someone had climbed over the fence, they could still be hiding near the house. A real intruder was possible, though the height of the window made no sense. Maybe someone had brought a ladder, but there had been no sound of metal moving, no footsteps, and no voices. Why would a person climb into a fenced garden at 1 in the morning only to tap on a 14-year-old's bedroom window? If they wanted to break in, they would try a door or a lower window. If they knew me, they could call my name. If it was a prank, they would need to know which room was mine and somehow reach it. The more I thought about it, the less I wanted to know. I stayed away from the window for the rest of the night. Even with the tapping stopped, I felt as though something might still be outside, standing silently behind the curtain. I imagined pulling the fabric aside and finding a face inches from the glass. Because the back of the house was elevated, the face would not belong there. It would mean someone had climbed the wall or was standing without support. That image remained in my mind until morning. The next day, I could see the garden clearly. Nothing obvious was beneath the window. No ladder leaned against the wall. No bins or objects had been moved into position. The fence appeared normal. There were no footprints that I remember, though the ground may not have been soft enough to hold them. The window had no cracks, marks, or signs of impact. If stones had struck the glass, there might have been small chips or dirt on the ledge. There was nothing. The experience became one of those events that are small when described, but terrifying to live through. Nothing entered the house. I never saw a figure. The tapping lasted only a short time, yet the exact sequence made it impossible for me to forget. I heard a familiar signal. I assumed it was my brother. I got up to let him in. Then, I found him arriving through a different part of the house while the signal continued behind me. It felt almost like something had copied his old behavior. That possibility disturbed me more than a random noise. My brother had not used the stone method in years. Only someone familiar with our family would know that tapping on my window meant I would get out of bed and open a door. But my bedroom had changed. The old signal came from the new, unreachable window. It was as though something remembered what my brother used to do without understanding that the layout no longer made it possible. Maybe that is why I heard fingers instead of stones. It repeated the idea of him tapping for help, but not perfectly. Another possibility is that the timing was a coincidence. Something outside made the noise, perhaps an animal or loose object, while my brother happened to arrive. When the front door opened, vibration moved through the house and shifted whatever was touching the window, causing the tapping to stop. That is one of the most practical explanations. Old houses carry vibration. A door opening or closing can shake walls and windows slightly. If a loose piece of guttering, wire, or debris was striking the glass, the movement of the house might have knocked it away. But I did not find anything near the window the next day. There was no cable, branch, or loose object hanging against it. The sound also seemed too much like fingers. I know memory can become more dramatic over time. Perhaps it was only a light ticking noise, and fear changed it into deliberate tapping after I saw my brother enter. But I remember the sound clearly. It had rhythm. It paused between taps. It was exactly the kind of noise a person makes when trying to get someone's attention without waking the whole house. I have sometimes wondered whether the factory had anything to do with it. Industrial buildings can produce strange noises after hours. Metal cools, machinery shuts down, and pressure changes inside pipes or ventilation systems. Sounds can travel across open land and seem closer than they are. A repeated noise from the factory might have reflected from the house and appeared to come from my window. But this did not sound distant. It sounded directly against the glass. The factory was behind the property, beyond the garden and fence. Even if a machine produced a tapping noise, it would not stop exactly when my brother entered. The main road was another possible source. A passing vehicle could have thrown gravel, and small stones might strike the house. But there were no cars at the time, and gravel would create random impacts, not steady finger like taps. The village was too quiet. That silence made the noise clearer. There was no background sound to confuse me. The night was still enough that I could hear my brother opening the front door from the back hallway. I know which direction the tapping came from. It was my window. For a while afterward, I became nervous whenever my brother stayed out late. I listened for the front door rather than the window. If any sound came from the glass, I stayed in bed. I no longer assumed it was him. Sometimes the wind made small noises around the house, and every tap brought back the memory. I would wait until I heard his key at the front door before relaxing. I also avoided looking behind the curtains at night. Even now, closed curtains make me feel safer than open windows, but part of me knows fabric does not protect anyone. It only prevents you from seeing what might be looking in. The tapping never happened again. That should support the idea of a harmless, one-time cause. A bird, a loose object, a strange vibration, something ordinary that happened once and then disappeared. But one-time events are often the hardest to solve because there is no chance to test them. If the noise repeated every windy night, I could connect it to weather. If it happened whenever the factory shut down, I could blame machinery. If a branch eventually appeared near the window, I could accept that I overlooked it. There was no pattern. Only one night. Only one arrival. Only one familiar signal from a place no person could reach. I have also thought about whether I might have been dreaming. Perhaps I woke partly, heard my brother entering through the front door, and dreamed the tapping before becoming fully conscious. The mind can combine real sounds with dreams. The key turning downstairs might have triggered a memory of stones hitting my old window. By the time I opened my bedroom door, I believed the imagined tapping was still happening. But I remember getting out of bed because of the noise. I remember crossing the room while it continued. I remember opening the door and hearing both sounds at once. The tapping behind me, the front entrance opening below. The overlap is what makes the memory so strong. It was not one sound mistaken for another. They came from opposite directions. Maybe a family member inside the house caused it as a prank. Someone could have tapped on the wall or window frame from another room, then stopped when my brother arrived. But no one else was awake, and the rear wall did not connect to another indoor space where someone could stand. The sound came from outside the glass. I never found out what it was. I did not investigate because I was too frightened. Part of me regrets that. If I had opened the curtains immediately, I might have seen a bird, loose wire, or harmless object and solved the mystery. I might also have seen nothing. Or I might have seen something I could never forget. At 14, I chose not to know. I stayed in the hallway and waited for daylight. Looking back, I think that was the safest choice. If it was a real person, opening the curtain would have shown them that I was awake and alone. If it was something else, I did not want to meet it through the glass. The house remained normal afterward, as far as I know. I did not experience a long haunting. No one appeared in my room, and nothing tried to enter. That is why I cannot confidently call the event paranormal. There may be a simple explanation hidden in the details. Still, the physical layout leaves very few possibilities. The garden was fenced. The rear of the house was raised because of the slope. There were no trees or branches by the window. My brother had a key and entered through the front. The tapping continued until he crossed the doorway. Then, it stopped. There was no time for anyone outside to move from the back to the front. No one could have reached the window easily. Even if the fence had fallen, a person would still need to climb high enough to touch the glass. The sound was not near the wall. It was on the window itself. Sometimes I imagine what my brother would have seen if he had walked around the back before entering. Maybe there would have been someone standing beneath my bedroom, looking up. Maybe there would have been nothing at all. Perhaps the tapping was not meant to imitate him. Maybe it was only trying to make me open a door. That thought bothers me most. I believed my brother needed help, so I got out of bed and went downstairs. If I had opened the back door before hearing him at the front, I would have unlocked the house for whatever was outside. The tapping stopped the moment he arrived, almost as if his presence interrupted something. Maybe the goal had been to draw me toward the back entrance while the rest of the family slept. I cannot prove that. It may be nothing more than fear creating intention where there was only coincidence. But when I remember the night, the sequence feels too exact. A sound my brother once used to make me open the house returned years later. It came from a window he could no longer reach. I followed it. Then the real brother entered somewhere else. Whatever had been tapping stopped as soon as he did. I never looked outside. I never discovered what stood beneath my window, if anything stood there at all. And after all these years, I am still glad I left the curtains closed.
Back when I was in my 20s, I had a close group of friends. Like a lot of people that age, we spent our weekends hanging out, going to parties, and sometimes ending the night at a strip club. It was just what our group enjoyed doing back then. One of our friends was Kevin. Kevin was one of the nicest people you could ever meet. He was not the typical ladies' man. He was a little overweight, kind of nerdy and quiet. But he had a great personality and was someone everyone genuinely liked being around. Things were also going incredibly well for him. He had just earned a full scholarship to MIT. From the outside, it looked like his future was wide open. Then, everything changed. One day, while I was at work, my friend Scott called me. He told me Kevin's dad had called because Kevin was missing. His wallet and his car were still at the house, but Kevin was gone. So was one of the family's guns. The moment I heard that, I knew something was very wrong. I told Scott I was leaving work immediately and would be there in about 20 minutes. I had barely made it to my car when my phone rang again. It was Scott. His voice sounded completely different. He told me not to come in a hurry anymore. Kevin's dad had found him. He was outside, against a tree. He had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. I remember feeling completely numb. Nothing prepares you for hearing news like that. I still drove over because I needed to be there with everyone else. A few days later, we gathered for the visitation. It was an open casket service. The funeral home had done everything they could to restore his appearance, but you could still tell where they had reconstructed the side of his face that had been injured. Seeing him like that made everything feel painfully real. The next day was the funeral. After it was over, our group of friends decided to do something we all believed Kevin would have appreciated. We went to a strip club. It was not because we were trying to forget him. It was because we wanted to celebrate the kind of person he was and remember the good times we had all shared together. It felt like something that would have made him smile. The next morning, something happened that none of us has ever been able to explain. One of my friend's cars was covered in morning dew. Written across the window were the words, "Thank you." Sitting on the hood was an empty can of Pabst Blue Ribbon. That was Kevin's favorite beer. To this day, I have no idea how it happened. Maybe someone in our group did it as a quiet tribute without ever admitting it. Maybe there is another perfectly ordinary explanation. Or maybe it was simply one of those moments that people carry with them because it brought comfort during an unimaginably painful time. Whatever the truth is, it has stayed with me for more than 30 years. What stays with me even more is wondering if things could have been different. Kevin had so much going for him. He was smart. He had friends who cared about him. He had an incredible future ahead of him. But none of us knew how much he was struggling inside. Back then, in the 1990s, people did not talk openly about depression or suicidal thoughts the way they do today. Many people believed they had to deal with those feelings alone. Looking back, I wish Kevin had felt like he could have talked to one of us. I wish he had known that none of us would have judged him. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe not. That is something I will never know. But if there is one lesson I have taken from losing my friend, it is this: keep an eye on the people you care about. Sometimes the person who seems to have everything going for them is fighting a battle that no one else can see. A simple conversation, a phone call, or asking someone if they are really okay might mean more than you will ever know.
My grandparents used to live in a house in South Texas that was more than 100 years old. It was the kind of house that looked normal enough in daylight, but became unsettling after sunset. The walls creaked when the temperature changed. The floorboards complained under even the lightest footsteps, and the old doors never seemed to close quietly. My grandparents took good care of it, especially considering its age. They repaired what they could, repainted rooms, fixed leaks, and made sure the place remained comfortable for the family. The backyard was large, dry, and open, with patches of dirt where the grass struggled to grow in the Texas heat. Near the back of the property stood an old shed That shed was the one part of the place my grandparents never managed to clean properly. It was packed with old tools, broken furniture, boxes, pieces of wood, rusted equipment, and things no one seemed able to identify anymore. Some of the junk may have belonged to people who lived in the house before my grandparents. Other items had probably been placed there by my grandfather over the years and forgotten. Whenever someone opened the door, the smell of dust, oil, old wood, and metal came pouring out. The inside was so crowded that there was barely enough space to walk. Long-handled tools leaned against the walls, boxes were piled on top of one another, and loose objects covered the floor. The shed had only one small window. It was a tiny screen window built into one side of the wall. The mesh was old and dark, and because the inside of the shed was poorly lit, it was almost impossible to see through it clearly. From outside, you could usually make out only shadows. That window was one of the main reasons all of us grandchildren hated the shed. During the day, it looked like a black square in the wall. At night, it looked like an opening into something much deeper than a small storage building. We all thought the shed was haunted. None of us had any real evidence. We were children, and the place simply looked frightening. Every time we walked past, we imagined something watching from behind the screen. The tools inside sometimes shifted or made noises when the wind moved the building, and any sound from that direction was enough to make us run. My grandfather knew exactly how afraid we were. He was an old prankster and enjoyed frightening people, especially the grandchildren. He was never cruel, but he loved getting a reaction. If he knew one of us was nervous about something, he would find a way to turn it into a joke. The shed became one of his favorite places to scare us. Sometimes he would go inside to search for a tool. If he noticed one of us walking nearby, he would suddenly shout from the window. Other times, he would press his face near the screen and scream, "Boo!" Because we could not see him clearly through the dark mesh, the sound always seemed to come from a shadow. Even when we knew it was probably him, we still jumped. He found that hilarious. We would scream, run toward the house, and hear him laughing behind us. After a while, we learned to expect it. If we saw the shed door open or knew Grandpa was working nearby, we tried to act brave. We would walk past while pretending not to notice the dark window. He usually waited until we were almost beyond it before yelling. The worst part was that he did not do it every time. Sometimes the shed remained completely quiet. That uncertainty made the pranks more effective. We never knew when his voice would suddenly come through the window. By the time I was 11, I thought I had become too old to be frightened by it. I still did not like the shed, but I no longer ran every time I heard a sound. I knew my grandfather's tricks. If a voice came from the window, I assumed it was him. One day I was outside near the back of the house. I do not remember exactly what I was doing. I may have been crossing the yard, playing, or going inside to get something. It was daytime, and nothing about the afternoon felt unusual. As I walked near the shed, I heard my grandfather's voice. It came through the small screen window. He called to me. At first, I thought he was preparing another prank. Then he told me to come inside the shed. "Come into the shed," he said. I heard him laugh afterward. The voice sounded exactly like my grandfather. There was nothing faint or unclear about it. I recognized his tone, the way he spoke, and the laugh he always used after trying to scare one of us. I stopped walking and looked at the window. The inside was dark as usual. I could not see a face through the screen. There may have been a shadow near it, but with all the junk inside, it was difficult to tell. I did not feel immediately afraid. Instead, I felt annoyed. I thought Grandpa was trying the same trick again, and I wanted to show him that it would not work this time. "Grandpa, you can't scare me," I called back. I expected him to laugh again or make another noise, I do not remember hearing a response. The shed door may have appeared closed, but I did not think much about it. My grandfather sometimes used locks or latches, and from where I stood, I may not have been able to see clearly whether the door was fully secured. I decided not to go inside. Maybe part of me still disliked the idea of entering that dark, crowded place. Even if Grandpa was waiting there, the shed smelled bad and was full of sharp tools and old junk. Instead, I continued toward the house. I walked inside through the kitchen. Everything felt normal. The kitchen was bright, familiar, and safe compared with the yard. I passed through it and went into the living room. My grandfather was sitting inside. For 1 second, my mind refused to understand what I was seeing. He was not dirty from working in the shed. He was not walking in from another door. He had clearly been inside the house. I stared at him. He looked back at me, probably confused by my expression. My whole body went cold. The voice at the shed had sounded exactly like him. Only moments earlier, someone had called me from the window and told me to come inside. There was no way my grandfather could have spoken to me from the shed, run across the yard, entered the house, passed through another door, and settled into the living room before I arrived. I had walked almost directly inside. He would have needed to move past me. I began to panic. I asked him how he had gotten inside so fast. He did not understand what I meant. I told him that he had just called me from the shed. My grandfather denied it. At first, I thought he might be continuing the prank. He sometimes acted innocent after scaring us, pretending he had no idea what happened. But his confusion looked real. He said he had been inside. Other family members confirmed it. That was when I completely lost control. I began speaking too quickly, trying to explain what I had heard. I told them Grandpa's voice came through the screen window. I repeated the exact words. Come into the shed. I told them about the laugh. The adults looked at one another. Some assumed I had heard something else. Maybe a neighbor had shouted nearby, or another relative had tried to scare me. I knew what my grandfather sounded like. This was his voice. Not a voice that was slightly similar, not an unclear sound that I had misunderstood. It was him. The family decided to investigate. Several people came outside with me. I was glad they did because I did not want to walk near the shed alone again. The yard looked exactly as it had before. No one stood near the building. The little screen window showed only darkness and shapes. We approached the door. It was locked from the outside. The lock had not been opened or moved. That meant no one should have been inside. My grandfather unlocked it, and some of the adults went in. They searched as much of the shed as possible. This was not easy because it was filled with junk, but they looked behind boxes, tools, furniture, and the larger objects where a person might hide. No one was there. There was no second door. There was no opening large enough for someone to crawl through unnoticed. The screen window was tiny and secured in place. A person could not have climbed through it. The shed had been locked from the outside the entire time. That left no clear explanation. The adults began treating the whole thing like a joke or misunderstanding. Some laughed and said I was trying to scare everyone. Others thought I had made up the story because of all the pranks my grandfather had played before. A few suggested I had heard an echo from inside the house or confused another voice with his. I kept insisting that someone had spoken from the window. Nobody believed me. My grandfather himself may have thought I was getting revenge for all the times he frightened us. Maybe he believed I invented the story to make the shed seem haunted, but I had no reason to create something like that. I had not planned it. I had walked inside expecting to find him laughing about another prank. Instead, he was already there. For the rest of the day, I avoided the backyard. I kept thinking about the words. Come into the shed. The voice had not only called my name or shouted boo, it had invited me inside. That detail became more frightening the longer I thought about it. If it had been a ghost, why did it want me to enter? If it had been a real person, how did they get into a locked shed? And what might have happened if I had obeyed? At first, the adults assumed I was afraid of something supernatural. They knew all the grandchildren already thought the shed was haunted. But as I became older, another possibility frightened me even more. I began wondering whether someone had been hiding near the shed and imitating my grandfather. Maybe a stranger had entered the property without anyone noticing. Perhaps he stood close to the wall, just beyond my view, and made his voice come through the screen. That person could have known my grandfather's habits. He might have watched him scare us before and learned that the grandchildren would trust a familiar voice from the window. Maybe the shed was never the real destination. The stranger could have wanted me to move closer, where he could grab me from behind the building or pull me out of sight. If so, my answer may have saved me. Grandpa, you can't scare me. By saying that, I revealed that I believed it was only a prank, but still refused to enter. Then I walked away. I sometimes imagine what the person behind the shed might have done after I went inside. He could have slipped through the yard, climbed a fence, or hidden until the family finished searching. The adults checked inside the shed. They may not have searched the entire property. That possibility is one reason I still believe I may have almost been kidnapped. A stranger hiding outside the shed would explain the locked door. It would also explain why no one was found inside. But it does not explain the voice perfectly. Imitating a person's voice well enough to fool their own grandchild is not easy. I knew my grandfather. I heard him every day when visiting. The laugh sounded like his too. Perhaps fear and expectation filled in the details. Since Grandpa often called through the window, my mind automatically decided any male voice from that direction belonged to him. Maybe the person did not truly sound identical. Memory can become more certain over time. But I remember recognizing him immediately. There was no hesitation. That is what made me speak back so confidently. Another possibility is that my grandfather really did call from somewhere else, and the sound traveled strangely around the house. The old property had hard walls, open spaces, and areas where voices could echo. Maybe he shouted from a back room or window, and I believed the sound came from the shed. But he said he had not called me. Other relatives were with him or near him. And why would the words be, "come into the shed"? There is also the explanation everyone else preferred. I imagined it. The shed had frightened me for years. My grandfather repeatedly used it to scare us. Perhaps I walked past expecting to hear him, and my mind created the voice from ordinary sounds. Children can hear words inside wind, machinery, birds, or distant conversations. Once the brain expects a sentence, random noise can begin to sound like it. That is possible. The problem is how vivid the memory remains. I heard his voice. I heard the laugh. I answered. This was not a half-formed sound I understood only later. I had a complete conversation, even if I was the only person who replied. For years afterward, I refused to go near the shed alone. If my grandparents asked someone to bring in a tool or carry something outside, I made sure another person came with me. I stopped looking through the screen window. Even when I knew the shed was empty, I had the uncomfortable feeling that someone might be standing inside the darkness, waiting to speak. My grandfather eventually stopped using the shed to scare us as often. Maybe he realized the experience had affected me more seriously than his old pranks. He may not have believed the strange voice was real, but he could see that I was no longer pretending to be frightened for fun. Whenever he went inside, I watched carefully to make sure I actually saw him enter. If a voice came from the window, I checked where he was before answering. Nothing similar ever happened again. No other child heard someone calling from the locked shed. No stranger was discovered on the property. No tools or objects were stolen. There were no signs of an attempted break-in. That makes the kidnapping explanation difficult to prove. Why would someone choose that day, imitate my grandfather once, and never return? Maybe I walked away before the plan could go any further. A kidnapper may have realized the property had too many people around and decided not to risk trying again. Or maybe there was never a person at all. The thought of a ghost is disturbing in a different way. The shed was full of old objects, some of which may have belonged to people who lived in the 100-year-old house long before my family. We did not know the history of every tool, box, or piece of furniture stored there. Perhaps something connected to the property remained inside. Maybe it had watched my grandfather frighten the grandchildren and learned his voice. That idea sounds impossible, but it fits the event in a way that normal explanations do not. Something inside the locked shed called to me using the voice I trusted most. It told me to come closer. Then it laughed. I do not know what I would have seen if I had opened the door. Of course, the door was locked from the outside. At 11, I might not have been able to open it anyway. Maybe that is why the voice wanted me there. It could have expected me to stand near the window or search for the key. Perhaps there was never any danger. Maybe it only wanted to frighten me. But the words did not sound playful after I found Grandpa inside the house. They sounded like an invitation. The house and shed were eventually changed with age. My grandparents may have cleaned parts of the property, moved things around, or gotten rid of old belongings. I do not know whether the shed still stands in the same condition. In my memory, it always remains dark and crowded. I see the tiny screen window. I hear Grandpa shouting boo on all the ordinary days. Then, I hear the other voice. The one that sounded exactly like him. Sometimes family members still bring up the story. Most of them treat it as something funny I did when I was young. They say I wanted to scare them after being frightened by Grandpa so many times. They smile and repeat that the shed was locked. To them, that proves no one was inside. To me, that is the reason the story is still frightening. If the door had been open, I could have believed Grandpa slipped out and ran inside. If someone had been found hiding there, at least we would have known who spoke. But the lock was still in place. No one was inside. My grandfather had been in the living room the entire time. I do not expect everyone to believe me. I understand how the story sounds. A child who was already afraid of a shed heard a voice associated with years of pranks. The mind can create convincing things, especially when fear and expectation are involved. But I know what I heard. I heard my grandfather call me through that window. I heard him tell me to come inside. I spoke back. Then I walked through the kitchen and found him in the living room. Even now, I keep returning to the same question. Who was I talking to? I may never know whether it was something supernatural, a stranger hiding on the property, or a trick of my own mind. The stranger explanation may be the most realistic. It is also the one that scares me most. A ghost might have wanted only to frighten a child. A real person may have wanted me to enter the shed so no one would see what happened next. Everyone else thinks I was trying to scare the family. I still think I almost walked into something I would not have escaped.
So that's where we'll stop tonight. Before you go, remember this. Every story you just heard was real. Real people, real nights, and none of them saw it coming. If that got to you the way it gets to most people, do one thing before you leave. Hit subscribe. I post new stories all the time, and I don't want you to miss them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.